Good morning. We need to get moving because these get the children to school. We're up to the Chof Amud Aleph, top line, and we're discussing shilas in passive voice. So what would you say if you've got a chotzer going to passive voice? Are you allowed to carry from the chotzer to the passive voice? This is the next shilah of the Gemara. So the Gemara says, Pashtus, you would say that it's also because you're carrying from Mishusay Yochid to a different Mishusay Yochid. One Mishusay Yochid to another is forbidden. Over here you have a certain advantage, and that is like this. Chazal only forbade you to carry from one Mishusay Yochid to another. And say, my back garden to your back garden. Since my back garden is made for me, your back garden is made for you. Passive voice was not really made for anybody, in the sense that nobody used it properly. It would go for a drink and go out. Since it wasn't a proper tashmish, wasn't proper usage, therefore there's no issue to abandon to carry from one to the other. It says it like this. Top line of Chofam Dal. It's actually a picture. Let's upload the picture. It is picture Kuf Pei. And if you don't mind at the same time to upload Kuf Pei Aleph and Kuf Pei Base. And Kuf Pei Gimel if you don't mind. Kuf Pei. Basically, you've got chotz opening up into passive voice. So the shaila is, are you allowed to or not? Are you allowed to carry from there to there and back and forth? Omalei mutter. You're allowed to. Why are you allowed to? Because as we said, the passive voice is not a meyuchadika thing. So therefore it's mutter. Steinberg. That is the next picture. Kuf Pei Aleph, where you've got two chatzeros opening up into one passive voice. Now that is slightly worse, because now the passive voice is being used by two different chatzeros. Being used by two different chatzeros, therefore, Chaim, can you see the pictures? Yeah, you can. Very good. So therefore, by these two chatzeros going in, therefore now two people, it's two different people are using it. Omar Osa, it's Osa. Omar, not only is it also to carry from a chotzer into passive voice, but even if you make an eruv through the passive voice, it'll still be also. Why? Because this is a slightly delicate point. It's like this. To make an eruv, there has to be an entrance from one to the other. If, for example, I want to make an eruv from my garden to your back garden, there has to be some way of getting from my garden to your garden. If the only way to get from your garden to my garden is, let's say, through another rishus, we cannot make an eruv. Over here, we're talking about a situation where they actually made an opening between the two chatzeros. But since they're making an eruv also for the passive voice, a normal person coming along will think to themselves, the eruv was through the passive voice, and that's also, so it's forbidden. We don't make such a kseva. I have a price that supports. Why?
Anybody doesn't know. The whole thing.
No, but normally you've got normal rishus and the normal things. So people understand. You make an error between the two of you. Yeah, it's much. Only I've got a price to support you. If a chotzer goes into between the ben apasim, you're allowed to carry from the passive in and out. State before, the advice says clearly that if you do make an error, you're allowed to carry through passive words. So that's a steer to avodah who said you're not allowed to. That's picture proof base. But what happened was you actually broke down the wall between the two chatzevos and the passive voice. So therefore everybody can see that, and therefore your shared entrance. And therefore people understand that the reason why you're going into do make an error for passive voice is not through the entrance of the passive voice, but rather through the entrance between themselves, because there is no block there. It's not like in Kuf Pei Aleph, where if you look carefully, you'll see that it looks like two different chatzeros going to passive voice, and it looks as if you're using the passive voice as the eruv. Here, everybody can see clearly that you're going from each other, and therefore there's no problem of the gzeo that people will think that you're doing an eruv for passive. We said the whole heter of passive voice is for what? Is that people should be able to drink. What happens if the water source dries up? The whole mechitza was made for water. My main can, mechitza in can. There's no water, there's no mechitza, and the passive voice can't be carried in. What happens if they dried up on Shabbos, and on Shabbos a new source of water came in? For example, it rained, and now there's more water inside. So Amalei Abai splits up the question into two. The when it was dried up, that you've got no question. Why not? The Boimene Demai asked Rabbi partially also. Rabbi told me that when there's no water, it's also. So what your question is now, the second stage, the water came back. End of the day, it's mechitza. The fact that the water came in on Shabbos, and therefore that created the mechitza is not a problem, and therefore it's okay. For anything more about it, we've had this before. A small point. There's two nafkiminas if something's a shusay yochid or not. One nafkimin is a chumma. Can you carry from a shusavavim into it? And another one is a kula. Can you carry around the area? Says Rav Nachman that many times when Chazal said that something is a mechitza, what they meant is a chumra, that it's a shusay yochid. And if we carry from a shusavavim into it, one would be chayav. But to carry within it, to say that this is considered a Meshusay Yachid, that they forbade. Let's say, for example, you've got a whole enclosure. Let's say Borton Park. So you've got two shilas. Is Borton Park Meshusay Yachid or not? One shaila is, it's a chumrah. Can you carry Meshusay into it? Another shaila is, can you carry within it? If it's a Meshusay Yachid, you're allowed to. This room is maybe the size of 1,000 miles, but if it's a proper Meshusay Yachid, you're allowed to. So therefore, we hear, says Rav Nachman, when do we say it's a mechit? It says only to be machmir, they're not allowed to carry into it. But to carry within it, that they never said it's a shusay yochid. It's only a chumah, not a kula. And it's more kit with Rav Nachman that amazed it. That's talk about somebody who built a mechitza on purpose on Shabbos. But when water came in by itself, that there's no problem. And therefore, if water came back on Shabbos, you're allowed to carry in it. Now, what would you say if somebody standing in the shusavavim and throws into passive birois? Right, he's walking along with shusavavim and he sees a smaller, this passive birois, which we said it's not a brilliant enclosure; it's only corners. Somebody carries for shusavavim into it. What would you say, chayav or potter? Oh, the problem is, but you see that Chazal allowed you to carry from the well into it. So this is the next discussion. If it's not really a mechitza on some level, what would be the heter to take water out of the well? So we're talking about where there was no well, and you made a similar kind of mechitzas in the Rosh Hashanah, and there was no well at all. That's obviously chayav. Why? If generally passive birois would not be considered a mechitza, at least minatiri, right? It's not. If minatiri would not be a mechitza, we explained in the beginning of the perk that Chazal over here will make of three colors. And the fact that there's an entrance wall and tenamas, but the fact is, all of them are kulas d'Rabbanan. If it would be, there's no way that the matter is to derive it. So for min hatira, obviously it's considered a shusay yochid. If min hatira is considered a shusay yochid, of course they have. Even if the public will walk through these entrances, and you might have thought that spoils it from being a shusay yochid, komash malon, that is still considered a shusay yochid. That the public come matter mechitza or ma bloza chadazimna. Bloza told it to us once that if there would have been, you made the passive voice around the world, and everybody's walking through this area. So what do? You have to tell the public to stop walking through it. Because if they keep on walking through it, it will not be a proper passive voice. Chachamim say it's not necessary. You can allow the public to keep on walking through it. Here we see how powerful a mechitza is. That even though you only make these little mechitzas around the corners, they have the power to make the shusay yochid, even when the public walk through it. So you see that Abelaz already told us this halacha that when the rabbim go through it, it's considered a shusay yochid.
Sorry. When would be a case of when the mechitza stops you, or doesn't allow you to carry into the shusay yochid, but it's the shusay yochid itself? What would such scenario be?
Right. Let's say, for example, you've got a very big kalfaf. So then you're not like this. You're not allowed to carry from a shusarabim into it, but you're still not allowed to carry within it. Yes.
Yeah.
Because like this, Chazal said that we allow you to. It could be minatira, it is a mechitza, and therefore carrying from shusarabim into it to shusarachid is a chayav. But we do our bottom, it's not considered a good enough mechitza to consider it a proper enclosure, and therefore you're not allowed to carry within it.
Right,
it's considered like a public place.
Fine.
Says, the Gemara's question is, our brother seems to have said that already told it to us. What's the that Rabbi was just saying Chachamim holds this, but I personally don't agree with it. The fact that he said here they taught us this halacha, and now he's telling us not only they taught the halacha, but I actually hold of it. Why did Rabbi need to say the second statement? Just say this statement over here. That came from Mishus Rabim into a passive voice is chayv, and then I will know everything. Well, it says Chodom Michal Chaver to it. Well, indeed, he only said it once, and that means he only said once the statement that came from Mishus Rabim into Mishus Yochid of a passive voice is chayv, and Chazal understood the other statement that where did he get it from? From this statement of the Chachamim that even when the public walk through it, you're still allowed to carry. So again, the halacha is that passive voice min haTorah is a real mechitza. It's a real mechitza, even if the public spend their way going through it. With Rabbanon, they didn't want to allow it. They didn't allow it. They forbade it because we said possible baloimad, etc. Only when it came to a well, they even allowed you to carry within it. But if there's no well, you're not allowed to carry within it. The Mishnah says that you're allowed to make the area around the well very small, but the minimum size is 2 amas. Why 2 amas? Less than 2 amas, the cow can't get in. If the cow doesn't get in, you'll take water from the well and take it out of the area which is enclosed by the passive voice into the Rishus Rabim, and you'll give the cow to drink there, which is carrying from Rishus Rabim. So what is this? You're not allowed to stand. Imagine you've got a house which is Rishus Yochid, and next to it a road which is Rishus Rabim, and you're very thirsty, and you see a bowl of water through the window. You're not allowed to stand in the Rishus Rabim and drink from the Rishus Yochid. Why? Because we're scared that you might tilt back and then drink it in the Rishus Rabim, and therefore you'll be carrying Rishus Rabim. The fact that when you're drinking, the water is going through your system and going all the way into your stomach, and your stomach is Rishus Rabim, that does not bother us, because that's not considered carrying. We are concerned that you will pick up water itself and step back into the Rishus Rabim. That's what we're concerned with. Similarly, Rishus Rabim, the other way around. You're standing at home, you're thirsty, you see rain outside, so you drink it, we're scared you might bring it in. If you bring most of yourself and your head into the place you're drinking, then we're not choishes. That means if you put most of your body inside the house, you can actually drink even though your feet are in the Rishus Rabim. Top of Chafamud base. Similarly in a wine press. This is a completely different halacha. Min haTorah, one is not chayv tumas ha'maisas until there's gemar malacha, until the food has been fully processed. With Rabbanon, they forbade one from drinking wine, even if it's not fully processed, as long as one is eating a proper drink. If a person's doing a temporary thing and it's not processed, no gemar malacha, one is allowed to drink temporarily. Drinking at a wine press is always considered temporary, because it shows they're not really taking it home to have a cup of wine. You're just having a taste. Now, if you're standing in the wine press and drinking, you're okay. You take the wine outside the wine press and drink it, no good, because now what you've done is you've shown that you're taking it out. What happens if you're standing with your feet outside and your head inside? So it depends. If most of your body is inside, it's okay. If not, it's forbidden. So it says, regarding people drinking, we said you need to have the majority. Do you need by a cow to have most of its head and its body inside the place where it's drinking or not? Now, seemingly this question is obviously answered from our Mishnah, because our Mishnah says clearly that if you want to give your cow to drink, it has to have its head and most of its body. So we see the same halacha which applies to human beings applies to animals. The Gemara, though, goes at great length now to discuss this. The reason being, there are 3 different ways to give water to a cow. 3 different ways. One way is to pour the water, put the bucket down, and let the cow drink. In such a case, the Gemara understood that there's absolutely no problem whatsoever. Because since you're putting the bucket down and the cow helps itself, what's the worst comes to worst? The cow will take the water out, the cow's not chayav, you're allowed to let the cow. So when you put the bucket down inside next to the well, that's not a problem. That is the best way. The worst way is when you hold the bucket, but you do not hold the cow. Since you're holding the bucket and you're not holding the cow moves around. Easily the cow will step out, and in your desperation to give it a drink, you'll take the bucket out of the area which is enclosed and give it a drink. So that is the worst. The Gemara discusses now the middle option, where you hold the bucket and you hold the cow, and therefore you're making sure that the cow doesn't move. So the question is, you could say, it's okay, I make sure the cow doesn't move, so I don't need Rosh Hashanah. Or you could say, no, In the end of the day, you are holding it, but you're also holding the bucket. And since the cow could move a bit, and you're trying to give it to drink, you're not putting the bucket down, so therefore it could be awesome. Again, there are 3 ways to give it to drink. Putting it on the floor, definitely mutter. Giving it to drink without holding onto it, definitely awesome. Holding onto the cow and to the drink, that's the shaila. And therefore the Gemara says you've got no raya from our Mishnah, because not necessarily is our Mishnah talk about the case which we're clearing about. So the Gemara says like this. It's a third line. When you're holding onto the bucket, but you're not holding onto the animal, of course that would be awesome. Because since you're holding the bucket and not it, the cow might move and therefore it's awesome. You're holding onto the cow and to the bucket. The Mishnah says clearly that you have to have most of the animal inside. Oh, we're not talking about in our Mishnah where you're holding onto the cow and you're holding onto the bucket, and nevertheless the Mishnah says that you have to have the animal inside. So the fact that you're holding onto the cow doesn't help you because we're scared that the cow will move back. No, to knock it more, knock it lot. The Mishnah talk about you're holding onto the bucket but not to the cow, where therefore it's easily going to come out and therefore it's forbidden. If you're holding onto the bucket but not the animal, then it should always be awesome. Because the Baisa says you're not allowed to give water in front of your animal to drink it. You can pour into the trough and let it drink, but you're never allowed to give an animal to drink on Shabbos. The reason being, animals tend to move. And if you give your animal to drink, you'll be chasing the animal around with the bucket in your hand, and you'll end up giving it to drink from Mishusach to Shusabim and vice versa. So therefore the Gemara says, even if it's Rosh V'Rubo, it would be awesome. Let's summarize. The Gemara asks a question, are you mechuyev to have Rosh V'Rubo when you're holding on to the animal? Says, well, yes, that's what our Mishnah is talking about. Says, well, no, our Mishnah is talking about when you're not holding on to the animal. Says the Gemara, when you're not holding on to the animal, you're never allowed to give it to drink. Says the Gemara, the Mishnah won't talk about it. The Gemara later will explain that Abai makes a complicated kimta to that brisa. And the brisa is like this. We're talking about, let's look at the picture. I'd say it's outside first and inside. Abai, for reasons which the Gemara will explain later, tells us a whole complicated kimta pshat in this brisa. The picture is Kuf Pei Gimel. And it's interesting that in my Gemara, the Bach also made a picture on it on the page. The story is as follows. You've got a big trough. The trough goes partly into the passive bivois. Therefore, you're allowed to fill up from the well and pour into the trough. The fact that once you pour into the trough, the water will then flow out of the passive bivois is not my problem. I'm pouring into the trough, it's okay. The cow is standing in the Rishus HaYochid. Look at the picture carefully. The cow is standing in a stable. The trough goes between the Rishus HaYochid to another Rishus HaYochid, meaning that the passive bivois is Rishus HaYochid, the stable is Rishus HaYochid, but in between is Rishus HaRabim. Because at the end of the day, out of the passive bivois is Rishus HaRabim. So for the Brisa says as follows, you're allowed to pour water into the trough, because what do we care? Nothing will happen. But to actually give water over the trough and give it directly to the cow, that is awesome. Why? Even though the trough is Rishus HaYochid, so you're not actually going to Rishus HaRabim because you're going along the trough to the cow. The problem is that you may find a problem with the end of the trough there. And what will happen is you'll walk around, go to where the cow, which is out, carrying the bucket with you. You were intending just to give the water into the trough over it to give to the cow. But in your enthusiasm to fix the trough, what you'll do is you'll go out into the Rishus HaRabim, stand by the area where the cow is drinking, and then fix it, and then you'll have carried from Rishus HaYochid to Rishus HaRabim. And that is the story, and therefore it's got nothing to do with our question over here regarding holding on to a cow, not holding on to a cow. So that's the more inside. A trough, which the trough itself is Rishus HaRabim, which is 10 tvachim high and 4 tvachim wide, thereby making it to Rishus HaYochid. But one end of it goes inside the passive bivois. You might come to see there's something wrong with the trough. You'll come to fix it. You'll carry the bucket with you. And you'll carry if something which you do, is not awesome in our Torah, then even if you did it, Chazal will not forbid you from doing something you might come to do it. We don't forbid you from doing something which you might end up doing, where if you might end up doing, you're not chayav in our Torah, it's only midrabanan. We only forbid you from doing something which is deraisa, not which is derabanan. And in this case, would it be deraisa to take the bucket to the Rishus Rabim? The Gemara says, no, why not? Because you didn't intend to take it into the Rishus Rabim. You were carrying the bucket with the intention to pour it into the trough. And then you were carrying it, and while you were carrying it, you suddenly noticed that you've got something. It's like, for example, sometimes on Shabbos, you'll put a pocket in your pocket, a safe or something. And then you see your friend outside, and you go outside to talk to him. Have you been over yesterday? I said, no. When you went outside to talk to your friend, you didn't intend to carry the sefer. You intended to go and speak to him. You didn't maybe even be aware that you had the sefer in your pocket. Says the Gemara, you're trying to take something from one corner of the room to the other. Here it's even more. It's worse. The case I said by a friend, you didn't even know you had it. Here, you know you had it in your hand. But when you picked it up, you never intended to take it to the shazabim. You pick up a cup because you want to take it into the kitchen to clear the dining room table. On the way to the dining room table, your friend is outside in the shazabim, so you take the cup outside. You're still potter. Why are you potter? Because when you did the akira, you never intended to take it to the shazabim. You intended to take it to the shazayochit. Steffi no chayav. Says the Gemara, the Gemara says, the other way around. What will happen is you'll take the bucket outside, fix the trough, and then you realize, hey, I've got my bucket in the Shusarabim. And you won't want the whole Shabbos to be without your bucket because you've got to feed your cows. So on the way back in, you'll pick it up again, this time from the Shusarabim into the Shusayachit. And you won't say to yourself, okay, so the Shusarabim, leave it in the Shusarabim, because you need your bucket. And you took it out on Shabbos. So what happened is, sometimes you'll fix it for the Maile, you'll end up doing it the other way around from Shusarabim into Shusayachit. After you fix the trough, you'll carry it from Shusarabim into Shusayachit. And therefore, that's the problem. Again, there are three ways to drink water to a cow. Put it on the floor, absolutely no problem. Holding it into your hand and then chasing after the cow, absolutely no good. Holding onto the cow and holding onto the bucket, where therefore you've got control on the cow, that's the shayla of the Gemara, you need Rosh Hashanah. The Gemara tried to bring the right from our Mishnah. The Gemara says no. Our Mishnah could be talking about a case where you're holding onto the bucket and not holding onto the cow. For the Gemara, in such a case, it's always us. It says, no, that case is a specific case of the brisa. We're talking about a buyer where you've got a complicated trough, when the fixing it, you might carry out. Now, the next Gemara is the exact repetition of this Gemara from one slight difference. Is the Gemara is not claiming you need Rosh Hashanah. The Gemara is claiming you need to hold on to it. So the Gemara says like this. By a human being or coming on the sack, it's enough to hold most of the body. That means like this. The Gemara is saying like this. Is it enough that it's slightly different. Before the Gemara says, do you need Rosh Hashanah by an animal? Maybe you don't need Rosh Hashanah. Now the Gemara is saying that maybe by a cow, Rosh Hashanah would not be enough. Why would it not be enough? Because since cows tend to move, by a human being, once you've got Rosh Hashanah inside, it's enough. Maybe by a cow, even Rosh Hashanah will not be good enough. So the Gemara says, hey, like it's before we said maybe Rosh Hashanah you don't need it. Now the Gemara said maybe Rosh Hashanah is not enough. Hey, the Gemara goes to exactly the same shakla mitaya, exactly the same. What says, when you're holding on to the keli, and you're holding on to the cow, so the cow will not run away, that's fine. The nokit mana, that's of course it's okay. The nokit mana, and when is the shaila, the nokit mana, the nokit law, you're holding on to the bucket, but not holding on to the cow. Man, is it enough to have Rosh Hashanah, or do you say no? Rosh Hashanah is still not enough because maybe the cow walk away. Oh, my late the Mishnah says clearly you have to have the majority of the cow inside. My love, the knockit mono, the knockit law. We're talking about we're holding on to the kid, not the cow. No, the knockit mono, the knockit law. We're holding on to both. It must be that you're holding on to both. The knockit mono, the knockit law. If you're holding the bucket but not the cow, mishori. Are you allowed to ever give a cow to drink when you're holding on to the bucket and not onto the animal? There's a problem. The animal will move, and you'll end up giving it to drink. And you'll end up coming to the Shusarabim. Well, Tanya, like the Brisa says, you're not allowed to take water and put it in front of the animal. You're allowed to pour it into the trough because that wouldn't be because that's not a problem. But to actually give a cow to drink from a bucket is always awesome. One says, no. That's not that case. That's a different case altogether. We're talking about a trough which is 10 by 4, therefore it's a Shus HaYachid. And part of it is inside of Shus HaYachid. You might see that it's ruined, you'll carry the bucket with you. Because nothing is just person takes something from one corner of the room to the other corner of the room. And after he did that kiva, he suddenly realized, he decided, you know what, I'll take it to the Shazam. And sometimes you'll take it back. After you fix the trough, you'll carry from the Shusarabim into the Shusayachid, and that's the problem. So therefore, let's go back. We had a shaila. Is it enough to have Rosh Hashanah? We didn't have a right. And then the Gemara says, no, that was the second shaila. The first shaila is, do you even need Rosh Hashanah? And both times we've gotten those shailas. What we do know is as follows, that to give it to drink when you're holding the bucket and holding on to the cow, that's not a problem. Because since you're holding on to the cow, we're not scared the cow will move away. Says the Gemara, to give it to drink when you're putting it down, that's also okay. Because since you're putting it down, we're not scared that you'll come to chase after the cow into the Shusarabim. The question is, when you're holding on to the cow and you're holding on to the bucket, do you need Rosh Hashanah, or perhaps Rosh Hashanah is not enough? The Gemara's got no raya because our Mishnah is not talking about that case, and neither is the Brisa. Now the Gemara tries to bring other rights. Toshima, Gomo, the camel. You can stuff it. You're allowed to stuff an animal. But evil says more like this. But evil, the only way to stuff an animal is you hold on to the food, you hold on to its mouth, and you stuff the food in. So you're holding on to the animal and you're holding the food. And it says, and it says before you need Rosh Hashanah. So even when you're holding on to the animal, you need Rosh Hashanah. So we've got a raya. Camels have very long necks. Since they have long necks, that's why you need Rosh Hashanah. But a cow that doesn't have a long neck, maybe it's not necessary to have a Rosh Hashanah. Because in the end of the day, even without holding on to the cow, it's not likely to run away. So once you're holding on to the cow, it's not likely to move away so much. Again, from the fact that it says that you're holding on to the camel and you're stuffing it, you still need Rosh Hashanah. The same thing by a cow, when you're giving it to drink, when you're holding on to the cow in the bucket, you should need Rosh Hashanah. So, well, no, camels have got long necks, therefore they easily move around. But a cow, even without Rosh Hashanah, you would be okay. Toshima, the Haman animal, Rosh Hashanah with them, you have to stuff it. But obviously, command knock it, one of knock it off. It could be no Rosh Hashanah. It get exactly the same vibe. And we're talking about stuffing an animal on Shabbos, where the only way to stuff an animal is to hold on to it and to hold on to the food. And yet it says Rosh Hashanah is a vibe that when you want to give to drink to an animal, you have to have Rosh Hashanah, even when you're holding on to the animal and to the keli. So the Gemara says, my Damon, that animal was talking about a camel. Well, that can't be. One Brisa says Behema, one Brisa says Gomer. If Behema meant Gomer, then the Brisa would not have changed the Nusach. If I say a story in one version and then I say a similar halach in a different aspect, I'm obviously about two separate things. The Gemara said no. They weren't said at the same time, meaning two different Tanoim said them. One Tana spoke about camel, one Tana spoke about animal, and he meant camel. If one person said it at the same time, obviously it can't be that's the same thing. But if two different people said it at two different times, so therefore there could be the same thing. One referred to animals and he meant the normal animal which a person needs to stuff, which is a camel. Since it's got a long neck, therefore they permitted it. So that's why they forbidden it. Only by long necks they forbidden it. But therefore by cows which don't have long necks, perhaps you don't need Rosh Hashanah. Tosis points out that you're not actually allowed to stuff an animal on Shabbos because it's a problem of the dechol on Shabbos. We mean over here not stuffing, but rather encouraging it to eat. But even encouraging it to eat, the way you do it is you put the food in your hand and you hold onto its head and you get it to eat. But you're not actually allowed to stuff the food down its neck. That will learn to Shabbos that is forbidden. It says the word like this. Only people going to the Beis HaMikdash are allowed. But let's say you're going to learn. Actually, I should make a mistake. The Meiri says he means anything like Oler Golim. Anybody going to learn, they're going to do a mitzvah. Let's say you're going just because you're traveling. You're not allowed to drink from passive words. And if you're just going for your own pleasure, you're not allowed. They only permitted it for animals, because human beings, what can they do, a human being? He can climb into the well, hold on to the walls of the well, and drink from there. You don't need to draw water. So what says, my behemoths Eiruvin, only an animal which is going to do aliyah l'regel. He has to climb in and climb out. It's very, very strange. That means if going to aliyah l'regel and you need to drink on Shabbos, and the well is Rosh Hashanah, the only way to do it is to climb and then drink in. It has to be fresh water, not old, stagnated water. Now, animals don't care about old water. So obviously we're talking about human beings, not animals. What difference does it make if it's fresh water or if it's gathered water? The Gemara is going to continue about this and we'll learn until Shabbos. But I just summarize what we've learned. The Gemara says the heter pasuk is only the tzarich mitzvah, like aliyah l'regel, to go and learn, etc. But for your own pleasure, it's forbidden. And even for aliyah l'regel, it wasn't permitted for human beings. It was only permitted for animals. Why only for animals? Because animals can't climb into the well to drink. They have to be drawn water for. So therefore, they're permitted to take the shesach to shesarabim. But a human being, he can climb down. The more later will say if he can't climb down, then we're allowed to draw out for him. But a human being normally can climb down. Since he can climb down, so therefore we insist that he climbs down. And therefore you've got, it's played well. If you're talking about animals, what difference make what kind of water? So the Lord says there has to be water which is fitting for human being, and only then you're allowed to give it to animals. I wish everybody a very, very good Shabbos.
You know where you're stopping tomorrow on the bottom?
Where the Aleph Amud Beis, I'll be starting at Chof Beis Amud Aleph, 6 lines from the top, because that's the end of that small point. The Gemara finishes off Chof Beis Amud Aleph, interesting, very, very interesting Gemara. Chof Beis Amud Aleph, 6 lines from the top. That's the Mitzvah Shema we'll get to, hopefully. It's only 45 minutes, but I think we should manage it. Okay, have a very good Shabbos.